You're standing in the mirror at 6:45 in the morning, turning sideways, checking how the jacket sits on your shoulders, and somewhere underneath the checking is a question you never say out loud. Would he be impressed? Would she notice? You don't even know who he or she is this morning. It changes. Some mornings it's a coworker. Some mornings it's a stranger in a parking lot you'll never see again. And some mornings, if you're really honest, standing there in the gray morning light, it's someone who isn't even in your life anymore, someone who hasn't seen you in years, someone who might not even remember your name, and you're still dressing for them. You adjust the collar one more time. You tell yourself it doesn't matter what anyone thinks, you believe yourself for about 4 seconds, and then you check the mirror one last time before you leave. Here's the sentence that's going to bother you for the rest of this video. You have never once, not one single time in your entire life, spent money to impress a stranger. You only think you have. Every dollar you've ever spent to look successful, to look put together, to look like you've made it, was aimed with almost surgical precision at one specific person, and that person has a name, and you know exactly who it is the second I finish this sentence. Let's call him Marcus. Marcus is 34. Marcus drives a car that costs more than he can comfortably afford, wears a watch he financed over 18 months, and has, by his own admission, no real idea why any of it matters to him as much as it does. He'll tell you it's about quality. He'll tell you a man in his position needs to look a certain way. He'll give you 6 different reasons, and every single one of them is a decoy for the actual reason, the one Marcus has never said out loud to anyone, including himself. Marcus grew up the younger of 2 brothers. His older brother, Chase, was the one who got looked at first at every family gathering, the one whose report card got taped to the fridge, the one who, at 17, got handed the keys to their father's old truck, while Marcus, at 17, got handed a bus pass. Nobody in that house was cruel about it. That's the part that makes it so hard to untangle. Nobody said Marcus mattered less. They just, without ever discussing it, treated Chase like the finished product, and Marcus like the draft still being worked on. Marcus remembers one dinner in particular. He must have been around 15 when Chase announced he'd made varsity, and their father actually stood up from the table, actually put a hand on Chase's shoulder, actually said the word proud out loud in a way Marcus had never once heard directed at him. Marcus sat there with his own report card in his backpack, a report card that was, objectively, slightly better than Chase's that semester, and said nothing because some instinct in him already understood that the news wouldn't land the same way twice in one dinner. The psychologist Robert Cialdini has spent decades studying what drives human behavior in social settings, and one of his most well-known findings is what he calls social proof, the tendency to determine correct behavior, and by extension, correct worth, by looking at what other people validate and reward. In a house with 2 brothers, the validation was not abstract. It had a name, a face, and it sat across the dinner table every single night, effortlessly getting the thing Marcus was quietly starving for. Marcus doesn't think about Chase when he buys the car. That's important to understand, because if you asked him directly, he'd laugh and say his brother has nothing to do with it, they don't even talk that much anymore, Chase lives 4 states away. But watch what happens the 1 week a year they're actually in the same room, at their mother's birthday, every single year, without fail. Marcus arrives in something new, not always a car, sometimes a jacket, sometimes a watch, sometimes just a way of talking about a deal he's apparently about to close. And every single year, for 1 single week, this makes complete sense to him, feels urgent, feels necessary, and then the week ends, Chase flies home, and the urgency evaporates like it was never there, until 11 months later when it quietly starts building again. The year Marcus turned 30, Chase showed up to their mother's birthday with a new fiance, a new job title, a new watch that Marcus noticed within the first 90 seconds and thought about for the rest of the night. Marcus went home that evening and, within a week, had put a down payment on the car he still drives now, the one he can't quite comfortably afford. He told himself it was time, that he'd earned it, that it had absolutely nothing to do with a watch he'd glanced at for 4 seconds at a dinner table. He believed that story completely, right up until the twist that finally cracked it open for him. Here's the twist that changes everything, and it will probably feel uncomfortable because it's supposed to. The economist Juliet Schor, who spent years studying what she called competitive spending patterns in her research on consumer culture, found that people rarely compare themselves against the abstract idea of everyone. They compare themselves against a specific, narrow reference group, usually just 3 or 4 people, and often just one, someone they measure themselves against, so automatically they don't consciously register it's even happening. You are not performing for society. Society is a costume the real target wears, so you don't have to look directly at who you're actually still trying to prove something to. Marcus finally sees this, not in therapy, not in a book, but at his mother's kitchen table 2 years ago, the year Chase didn't come. Some scheduling conflict, something with his job. Marcus shows up in the same jacket he'd worn all year. Nothing new, no urgency, and he has, by his own account, the calmest birthday dinner he can remember since he was a teenager. He doesn't check his phone to see if anyone's looking at him differently. He just eats dinner with his mother, actually tastes the food, actually listens to her stories instead of half listening while performing ease for an audience that year simply wasn't there. His mother even comments on it, tells him he seems lighter this year, and Marcus laughs it off, not yet understanding why she's right. It hits him 3 days later, driving to work in the same expensive car he financed 2 years ago, specifically for a week that had already passed. The car he bought to be seen driving by someone who, that week, hadn't even been in the state to see it. He sits at a red light and does something he describes, almost sheepishly, as laughing and feeling sick at the same time. He realizes the entire architecture of his spending, the whole elaborate performance, was built for an audience of one person who, most weeks of most years, isn't even watching. Chase, Marcus realizes with a strange, hollow clarity, has probably not thought about Marcus's car even once. Chase has his own kitchen table, his own dinner, his own audience of one that he's likely performing for without ever saying so. The sociologist and economist Thorstein Veblen wrote over a century ago about what he termed conspicuous consumption, spending visibly not for the utility of the object itself, but for the status the object signals to observers. What Veblen didn't fully articulate, and what modern research has since sharpened, is that the observer in most people's minds is not a crowd. It is rarely even a room full of people. It is almost always one specific set of eyes installed in childhood. A sibling, a parent, an old rival, a version of a person who may have changed entirely in the years since, while the eyes you're performing for stayed frozen exactly where they were, 17 years old, standing beside a truck you never got the keys to. You don't need to spend a single dollar to impress a stranger, because strangers were never the point. The stranger at the coffee shop, the person in the next car at the red light, the acquaintance scrolling your photos, they are stand-ins, extras in a scene where the actual audience member has a name you already know. Ask yourself, honestly, the next time you feel that specific pull toward a purchase that isn't really about need, whose face shows up first if you actually let yourself look? It's rarely a crowd. It's almost always one person, and once you can name them, the strange thing is the spell weakens almost immediately. The way any trick loses its power the moment you can see exactly how it's being done. Marcus still has the car. He didn't sell it in some dramatic act of enlightenment, and that's honestly the more honest ending, because most of this doesn't resolve in a single scene. But he says something changed the way he buys things now. Before every purchase over a certain size, he asks himself one question, quietly, privately, in the same mirror where this whole thing started for him. Who is this actually for? Sometimes the honest answer is still himself, and he buys it anyway, no shame attached. But sometimes the honest answer has a name attached to it, a very specific, very familiar name. And when that happens, more often than not now, he puts the money back in his pocket and drives home in the same car, to the same house, exactly as he is. Last year, at their mother's birthday, Chase showed up in the same watch he'd worn for 3 years running. Marcus noticed, and for the first time, felt nothing but a small, quiet curiosity about whether Chase had ever once, in all those years, been performing for him too, in some invisible mirror of his own, at 6:45 in some other morning, in some other house. checking how a jacket sat on his shoulders and wondering if his younger brother would finally be impressed. You're standing in the mirror again, turning sideways, checking how the jacket sits on your shoulders. Ask yourself the question Marcus finally learned to ask. Not would people be impressed? Would he be impressed? Would she notice? Say the actual name out loud, even just in your head, and notice how quickly the morning gets quieter once you do. Before you close this video, do the one thing Marcus never did until it was almost too late. Say the name. Not to anyone else, just to yourself. Right now, the specific person your last big purchase was really for. It might feel small, even a little silly, but naming it out loud is the exact moment the spell starts to lose its grip. If you're brave enough, drop that name, or even just the relationship, brother, father, an old friend, in the comments below. You'd be surprised how many people scrolling past are quietly performing for someone too, and your honesty might be the thing that gives them permission to finally look. If this story cracks something open for you, subscribe, because the next video might help you close the gap between the life you're performing and the one you actually want to live.